The two biggest up-and-coming grifters on YouTube teamed up to make a tier list. And to commemorate this moment of stupidity and bigotry, I decided to just cover both of them. By popular request. Yes, I'm talking about Basic Logic and Based If True. You guys wanted me to cover them again, and now I am. Now let's stop goofing around and get right into the meat.
Starting from the top, we have the everything is free strategy. I'm obviously talking about healthcare, welfare, social security, and any other government assistance program, federal or otherwise.
Oh yeah, because healthcare, welfare, and social security couldn't possibly be a state's responsibility. How could it handle such a burden?
This is a low-income voter's wet dream.
Of course, he's showing a Muslim woman when talking about low-income voters because subtle racism, am I right? That is definitely a targeted attack. Oh, but wait, Gabriel, you can't say that because he never outright said it. And I'm way too dumb or ignorant to read between the lines. I mean, come on, fucking hell, get real with yourself. Also, really funny how he talks about a low-income voter's wet dream while he sits on his ass the whole day, reacting and roasting people on Reddit. I'm sorry, but where is this elitism coming from?
And the government is very happy and willing to tax the most productive in society against their will to make it possible.
And then, of course, you're going to dick ride the very rich people that exploit millions of people to get to where they are, but that is somehow fine and dandy and earned.
Alrighty, next on our tier list is the destroy the child strategy, aka abortion.
Destroy the child, what the fuck?
You would think that systematically eliminating your own society's most vulnerable population would be seen as incredibly immoral.
First of all, scientifically, I kinda need to agree with him because the evidence is pretty clear that life starts at fertilization. This is less a scientific but more of a philosophical/legal or ethical question where you need to establish at what point a living being is granted human rights.
But it's actually seen as one of the greatest modern achievements ever, that we can provide so many women healthcare that even the most basic of science, logic, and morality gets discarded in pursuit of it.
Yeah, it's being celebrated because we are achieving women's bodily autonomy. It's not about the killing of fetuses, but rather the ability for women to decide what they want to do with their own body. Women wanting an abortion because they can't take care of another human being is a mature and grounded decision, and a very painful one that many of these women would prefer not to make. Pushing through and fucking up a whole generation of offspring to fulfill some moral obligation is actual moral bankruptcy.
And the worst part is that they'll lie to you and tell you it was 100% necessary when it's extremely clear that most of the time it was poor decision making beforehand that led to it.
The graph he's showing doesn't really talk about what led up to the pregnancy or what caused the pregnancy. It's more of reasons for seeking abortion. The statement he makes about reckless decision making doesn't really hold up because we don't know why it happened. If you also look into the data a bit more, because I think this is a very generalized graph, you will find a lot of really plausible reasons. A big chunk of abortions, for example, take place because of financial instability. Another is due to horrible relations to a partner or their families. Reasons are always diverse and reflect the individual's personal life circumstances. And in my opinion, it's always better to end a pregnancy instead of raising a child in unstable and unhealthy conditions.
And then they complain that the birth rates are declining and that we absolutely need third world populations to sustain our society.
Yeah, again, a very complex topic that just gets reduced to a rhetorical attack. Firstly, the Earth is vastly overpopulated. Humans, especially super wealthy ones, exploit resources disproportionately in comparison to other species and even other humans that are less fortunate. Even with a low fertility rate, the world's population would remain at 7.3 billion in 80 years, while we're consuming more and more resources with every new invention or technological breakthrough. And yeah, viable workforce from foreign countries that are willing to do the unpopular work is just helpful and also gives those people a chance to live a normal and fulfilling life, where in their home country they wouldn't have had the chance to do so. And by the way, this obviously requires cultural assimilation and similar moral values.
The two most powerful tools in the left's arsenal have just been ways for people to subvert personal responsibility. If we follow their incentive structure alone, it seems like all we're going to be left with is lazy, infanticidal and communists.
Wow. First of all, classic pull yourself up by your bootstraps rhetoric. I totally disagree with you. It is not subverting responsibility. In my opinion, it's keeping the institutions that dictate your life accountable. You want control? well, then at least make sure that we're happy, safe, and stable enough to be slaves to your system. Providing basic societal infrastructure so that people aren't afraid of losing their livelihood when taking risks doesn't destroy personal responsibility. In fact, it enables it.
The next one in A tier is one that troubles me greatly with the way our society is currently managed, and that's sanctuary cities and extremely loose immigration policies. And there's an extremely volatile voting incentive when we do allow a massive amount of immigrants who the Democrats clearly want voting, and voting for them specifically.
So by claiming there's a volatile voting incentive, you are basically accusing Democrats of intentionally letting people in so that they can win in elections. And obviously that's all by design, because the corrupt elite want to gain more control than they already have, because they definitely need your vote to be able to do whatever they want, as we've seen in the past. If these immigrants are naturalized, then yeah, they would have the right to vote in federal elections, as do all US citizens, by the way. The problem with your Democrat-led conspiracy theory is that naturalization is a notoriously difficult and long-lasting process. And also, undocumented immigrants cannot vote in federal elections. So it's a pretty shitty strategy to gain control, if you ask me. Secondly, immigrants aren't a monolith. They're incredibly diverse across multiple dimensions and don't exclusively vote Democrat. If voila, your argument falls apart.
The reason it isn't in S tier is because it hasn't been fully realized like the other strategies in S tier.
Also very funny, he says it hasn't been realized until now. Well, sir, why do you think that is? Maybe because it's not even possible in the first place? Have you thought about that?
Stand ready for my arrival.
Hello.
Ah, fantastic. I didn't look forward to you appearing, but well, welcome, I guess. Okay, this is not something I want to talk about in detail, but I just want to showcase this specific example of how he talks about Nazism and Nazi Germany and to show you what an unbelievably fucked up individual he is.
Schooling pushed the idea that Hitler and the Nazis were the ultimate evil, the devil, and their beliefs had to be avoided at all costs.
He talks about Hitler as if he had any redeeming qualities. Saying it like that relativizes and minimizes Nazi ideology so much, and as a German it pisses me off because it shows that you have no fucking formal education. He makes it seem like outright rejecting this disgusting ideology is somehow detrimental, or we're missing out on something that he knew at some point. Society, by the way, didn't collectively decide racism is bad because of an overused media trope. Rejecting and condemning racism as well as anti-Semitism is the foundation of a stable, secure, and pluralistic society. Okay, next.
The climate crisis lands in B tier. Its advantage is that it gives the left a perfect justification for degrowth and more state control. Fear must be maintained. Push it on impressionable children. Tell them the world is ending in X years because of capitalism. Selectively present findings in the most catastrophic interpretations. It's overused.
How can degrading earthly conditions get stale and overused? This is not an ideological argument, but an existential one. He says studies are being cherry-picked and exaggerated, but the literature is fucking unanimous. Thus, the assertion that the climate crisis is a fake justification for state control is unbelievably short-sighted and completely against science. Governments also don't really need crises to increase control. They can do that whenever they want.
But it gets worse, because nuclear energy exists. Both left and right-wing youth are interested in nuclear. It offers a clean and scalable energy source without requiring economic degrowth. Yet, fear of nuclear disaster is kept artificially alive to justify this continued struggle.
This is just a massive projection. Climate action globally is overwhelmingly centered around green growth and massive capitalist industrial investment, for example the Inflation Reduction Act, and not degrowth plots as he describes them. His point about nuclear energy is also completely historically backwards. The biggest hurdles to building nuclear plants right now are not purple-haired activists. Nuclear plants take decades to build, suffer from massive cost overruns, and private investors are hesitant to fund them compared to wind and solar.
Reparations gets D tier. The left needs some way of monetizing collective white guilt.
It's the fucking white guilt again. At this point, I just believe that white guilt is a concept that white people made up to create an enemy to make themselves the victims. And then you talk about subverting responsibility.
It's impossible to justify having the Irish, a people who've been historically victimized and subjugated, pay reparations just because they're white. And since the people who sold slaves to the Americas were other Africans, does that mean those of African descent have to pay? Then there's the issue of who ended slavery, not only in their own countries but worldwide. Small hint. They were white.
And that's why I say that education on history is so goddamn important. This is a profoundly embarrassing misunderstanding of modern reparation arguments.
Maybe we can make a tally of sorts. For every person your group has put into slavery, you owe X amount. But for every person your group has freed from slavery, you are owed X amount. If we do that, whites would likely be the recipients of reparations.
In a modern context, reparations are not based on an abstract global racial scoreboard or white guilt. They are based on specific, documented, legal, state-sanctioned economic theft that happened after slavery ended, such as Jim Crow laws, redlining by banks, and the denial of the GI Bill to black veterans. It is an argument about correcting documented wealth extraction and not a tally of who freed who. Even if today's generations don't own slaves, they still disproportionately benefit from the infrastructure their ancestors built. Generational wealth is inheritable, just as generational suffering. Also, white people didn't end slavery out of their own goodwill. They were forced to do so after intense revolts, with many slaves even freeing themselves during the Civil War.
And for our last one, I just threw Destiny, Hasan, Vaush, and Dean Withers on there because these are certainly not the people you want on your side. Destiny is one of the biggest cucks on the internet. Hasan's greatest sin is just generally being a who LARPs as a communist revolutionary. Vaush is a known pedophile, not really much else to say. And Dean Withers is like Destiny's Aryan son, whose first language is bad faith arguments.
Wow. For channels named Based of True and Basic Logic, dedicating a whole tier of a political strategy list to throwing playground insults is the ultimate intellectual white flag moment. That is what happens when you completely run out of actual arguments and just have to resort to standard internet drama. This is the proof you needed that this video is not a logical critique on anything substantially, but more so just culture war slop to inflame both sides and create more polarization, more culture wars on the internet, and even less actual solution finding. I don't necessarily agree with the people he mentions. I don't even watch them. If the allegations against those people are true, then fuck them, they are despicable. But just completely discarding what they say without actually explaining what they stand for and acknowledging what they say is completely cowardly. Yeah, that's where I'm gonna end it. I've had enough of these people. It's funny because Based of True actually wrote in my comment section that he wanted to talk to me, and then I told him that we can talk, and he never actually came back to me, so we never ended up talking.
But anyway, guys, I'm glad I could collaborate with the legends themselves over at Basic Logic.
Also, one last funny thing that I read in a community post about Basic Logic and the Basic Logic and Based of True collab, one of the people from Basic Logic's fan base said that Based of True is too moderate, basically, because he recognized that homosexuality is a naturally occurring thing. These are the people that we're dealing with, guys. I don't even know what to say. Anyhow, thank you for watching. I hope you enjoyed the video and this little comeback of main characters on this channel, I guess. And I don't know when I'll cover them again, so enjoy this one. I'll see you for the next one.